The drive had been surprisingly uneventful up to now. Mary and I had snuck out of the doctor's house under the cover of darkness, making every effort to avoid attracting attention as best we could and get to the car, right after deciphering what the note was really saying. Or at least, hopefully, deciphering what it was saying. Mary had seemed to accept my reasoning about Eden actually being the town readily enough, but in all honesty, I still had my doubts. It all just seemed to work out a little too well. The idea that Dr. Saul had intentionally left a note that gave a cute little clue on where to go for any random detectives that happened to wander into his house. It all just fit together a little too cleanly, like someone or even something was trying to pull us towards that place. And frankly, I do not enjoy being pushed around like a pawn piece in a chess game. But what was there to do about it? And was it even happening in the first place? Furthermore, what was the point of bringing it up to Mary anyway? Or even arguing with myself about it? There was no other place to turn to. No other place to go. It was either go to Eden, or bunk up in some random hole and wait for either the creatures or the military/police to find us, whichever came first. And I knew that neither her nor I would be willing to take the second option. So that meant it was time to hit the road. Mary had insisted on driving, saying that I needed to get some sleep and that she had gotten plenty in the hospital. I had attempted to protest, saying that her leg was still injured, but she had just glared at me for several excruciating seconds before I relented. "You're tired, Joe," is all she had said, and I couldn't find it in myself to argue, or maybe I just didn't have the energy. I was tired. So I got in the passenger seat of my old beater, and I gave some basic directions to Mary until she managed to get on the highway. Despite my best attempts to keep my eyes open for any creatures that might appear, before I knew it, my eyelids had slipped closed, and I was gone. My sleep was mercifully heavy, and I didn't have any dreams. When I awoke later, my eyelids were still heavy, like they always were after a hard night, and it was still dark out, but the moon had shifted its position in the sky somewhat, indicating that at least several hours had passed. I glanced out at the passing scenery, seeing only the occasionally dimly lit bush or scraggly tree. I turned to look at Mary, who glanced at me and gave me a small smile before returning her eyes to the road. Stretching, I attempted to blink the remaining sleep away. I would kill for a coffee right now. "Where are we? How long have I been out?" I asked, trying to get my bearings. It always took me a second to reorientate upon waking up, especially when it was in a moving car. Something about it just threw my internal compass completely off kilter. "It's about 1 a.m. The sun went down right as we left the house, and you fell asleep shortly after that. It's been about 6 hours. You can keep resting if you want. Nothing has happened, at least not yet. And if I see something, I'll wake you up." I knew what that pause meant, of course. She meant a creature. One of those creatures that I could still hardly believe was real. I stretched and yawned, adjusting in my seat. It was a tempting offer, but I knew that there was no way I'd be able to get back to sleep, at least not for a while. There was simply too much swirling around in my mind to be able to drift back off. No, blissful unconsciousness would not visit me again, at least not on this car ride. Instead, I gazed out the window, watching the arid landscape fly by me. Now that I finally had a moment to think and process everything that had happened, the insanity of it all really started to sink in. Giant, multi-armed monsters, pillars of flesh hiding in the basements of women's shelters, a cult seemingly behind it all. And somehow, me and Mary had gotten mixed up right into the middle of it. My earlier thought about being pulled and pushed around returned to me, and I gazed up at the sky, at that oh-so-bright star that always seemed to be guiding us, forward. Even now it sat at the end of the road on which we were traveling, shining like a lighthouse guiding a boat to shore. I might not have thought anything of it, except for the fact that I was certain it was the North Star, and we were heading south. I sighed and turned to Mary, taking a moment to really look at her. Despite her protests otherwise, she looked exhausted. Heavy bags hung under her eyes, and I saw a slight wince of pain every time she moved her legs. Her clothes were tattered and filthy. Not that mine could be said to be much better. We really needed to find a moment to stop and change. But beyond all of that, I could see something in her that she didn't have the last time I saw her. Something strong. That fire in her eyes. The flame that made her such a good partner. She was on a case now. She had a lead. And nothing was going to stop her from getting to the bottom of this. I thought back to that day. The day we had first met. It had been a cold, rainy day. Like so many of them seemed to be. And we were each doing an individual investigation into a case. It was a murder of a particularly unfortunate young man, a nobody whose most notable trait was his peculiar white hair. Poor bastard was electrocuted to death, a real nasty way to die, and both me and Mary suspected foul play. We ran into each other while on the crime scene, and we almost instantly started butting heads as we kept getting in each other's way. We almost lost the ability to work on the case entirely because of it, with our bickering driving the police up the wall. It wasn't until we decided to suck it up and give it one last try, to set our differences aside and compare notes like adults, that we finally started to put the pieces together. To cut a long story short, one really best left for another time, the poor guy was killed by some dame by the name of Abigail, a real psychopath type. She had done an excellent job covering it up, which is what led us to agree to work in the first place. We found that by working together, we were able to cover each other's weaknesses, see what the other couldn't. Mary had a knack for noticing the small details that often escaped others' sights, and she could keep a cool head no matter what, a trait that was very useful when shit hit the proverbial fan. But on the other hand, it was easy for her to lose track of the big picture, only see the forest for the trees, which would often lead her to circle the same dead lead for days. But worse than that, she didn't really get people, get their emotions and the way those feelings would affect their actions, the way I did. And I'm not saying this to tear her down. She has said this to me multiple times herself, even once referring to it as her greatest flaw. I, on the other hand, almost always understood the why, the motivations, the reasons for doing it, if given enough time. It's the how that I would struggle with, and that's where Mary would come in, putting that together like one building a tower, starting at the base and working her way up with each individual piece until she got a mountain of evidence that is impossible to dispute. It's a thing of beauty to watch, really. Back in the present, I really took in Mary, that cold fire in her eyes, and I was truly grateful to see it again. "Hey, remember how we first met?" I asked her, and I saw the ghost of a smile flicker across her face. "Sure. We somehow managed to both be investigating the Abigail case at the same time. We hated each other, at least at first." I laughed at that, which caused Mary to raise an eyebrow. "Well, I don't know if I would say I hated you. I just thought you were a bit of a tool." I laughed again, and her eyes flickered to me for a moment, an action that would have probably been nothing to anyone else, but to me told me she was as amused as I was. "A tool, huh? Well, that's fair, I suppose, considering I thought you were an old man who would be better off sitting on a front porch, talking about how much better the good old days were," she said, never taking her eyes off the road. I looked at her, waiting for any trace of mirth, but her stony visage betrayed nothing. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I'm only a few years older than you know. I am not old. Still in the prime of my life, even. But besides that, there are some traditions that stick around for a reason, because they work, and work well. You would have to be, well, a tool to ignore that," I said, watching the road just as intently as she did in Fox interest. I could almost hear her roll her eyes at me. "But then you asked me to go get a coffee with you." I thought you were hitting on me, she reminisced. I scoffed at that. Hardly. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I hated you, remember? Or so you say. I almost heard a hint of a laugh from her. We were on a case, and nothing helps get a fresh perspective like a warm cup of joe. I remember. You got a black coffee, bitter as all hell. Like you, I ribbed. She shook her head, but kept the story going. And you got a double shot espresso. 1 sugar, 1 cream. The same thing every time. A man of habit, you are. I smiled at that. It was true. We got out the paperwork, laid it all out right there on the table, middle of the day, in a crowded diner. The chief would have killed us. I nodded, thoughtfully. The case hadn't gone public yet, I continued. He wanted it on the hush-hush. But at that point, we were just about at our wits' end. We were willing to do anything to try to get a foothold. Regulations be damned. And if someone saw us, well, they could just go screw themselves. Ha! I had to laugh at that. A real laugh. It felt good. I hadn't laughed this much in what had to be months. And then we saw it, she said, a smile fondly gracing her lips. I knew what she was going to say, so I joined her, saying it at the same time. The school. She shot me a wry smile, then continued. It all connected back to it, but it was so infrequent that nobody had made the connection until then. I pointed out that it kept popping up, but I couldn't figure out why. Not until you put it all together. It was my turn now, and I continued, almost able to see the dingy diner and taste the mediocre coffee now. The victim was enrolled there, that's right. Nobody thought anything of it, until I saw that one of his fellow students was taking a little too much interest in the case itself. It was more than just trying to be a good classmate. It was like an obsession for her. She needed to know everything. Mary nodded, eyes still on the road but far away, clearly thinking back to that day. Once you pointed that out, it all clicked into place. The way she kept popping up in his life, the way they were in several classes together even though she far exceeded him academically, and, like you said, her strange need to keep up with the investigation. Once we saw that, it was easy to take it to the police and get a warrant. What a day that had been. It was Mary's first time raiding a house, and although it wasn't for me, it was by far the most unnerving, and it remained that way until the woman's shelter's basement. The whole place had been filled to the brim with gizmos and gadgets, most of them impossible to parse what they actually did. She thought she had discovered the secret to eternal life, I murmured. Insanity. She was just a kid. Mary gave an exasperated sigh at the memory of that day, but nodded for me to continue. All holed up in the basement, screaming about how she was going to live forever, that we were nothing compared to her. Mary stole a quick glance at me, knowing what happened next. I never should have gotten that close to the door, she said, frowning, and I waved away her frustrations with a flip of the hand. We were all excited. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else. She wanted to kill someone that day. It's obvious looking back on it now. You took a bullet for me, Joe. If you hadn't shoved me out of the way, it surely would have hit something vital. It was damn lucky you were wearing a bulletproof vest. Now it was my turn to scoff. Lucky? Luck had nothing to do with it, Mary. It was preparation. You gotta be prepared for anything when you're in those sorts of situations. A lesson I know you took to heart. She gave a small nod at that. I never forgot that day, Joe. I never forgot how close I came to the end of everything. And I never forgot how you saved me from it. Thank you. I felt the corner of my mouth tug upwards into a slight grin as she started to do it again. Thanking me, that is. Mary, I told you, you don't need to keep thanking me. The first time was more than sufficient, and besides, it's not like you haven't paid it back many times over since then. We're partners. Helping each other is what we do. She sighed at that. I know. That's what you say every time. But I never stop being thankful, Joe, for what you did, and for you. She turned and looked at me then, and I saw in her eyes that she was being truthful. I know I said this at the hospital, but I don't know what I would have done without you. I'm sorry I left. Her face barely changed at all. She was good at hiding her emotions like that. But I could tell from her voice that she was truly upset. Mary, I'm sorry too. This is my fault, honestly. When you left, I thought that maybe you just needed some space to think things through. I thought you wanted to be left alone, but then you just didn't come back, and I didn't do anything. First it was days, then weeks, then months, and I never once tried to contact you. That was wrong of me. I was surprised at the amount of emotion in my own voice. I had never realized how much it bothered me that she was gone until right now. But that was a lie, wasn't it? It had bothered me from day one. I had just chosen not to think about it, because that was easier. I registered on some level that Mary had pulled over onto the side of the road, probably because she was having difficulty concentrating. And I thought it was because I wanted to give you space. But looking back, it's because, well, it was easier for me. I hate confrontation of that kind. You know, the emotional sort. She snorted at that, but it was wrong. I was repeating myself. I guess what I'm trying to say, Mary, is that I missed you. I'm glad you're back. Even if it took the end of the world for it to happen. She shook her head at that, suddenly looking incredibly tired. I'm happy to see you again too, Joe. And again, it's not your fault. It was mine. I never even told you why I left. Mary, it was pretty obvious. I knew you were pregnant. It's not like you kept it a secret from me. You talked about how excited you were to raise a kid all the time. Then you disappear one day, don't contact me for months after, and now that we are back together, you have never once mentioned, well, a baby. The final word hung in the air long after I said it, so heavy it almost felt like it was physically suffocating me. Mary didn't say anything, but instead just put her forehead on the steering wheel, hiding her face. It struck me once again how tired she looked, in this beat-up old car in the desert in the middle of the night. Finally, I spoke up, saying something I probably should have said a long, long time ago. Do you want to talk about it? For an extended moment, she didn't say anything. It got to the point where I was starting to consider the idea that she had fallen asleep. Not an unreasonable thing. We had been through quite a lot, and she had been driving through the better part of the night. But finally she sighed, reassuring me she was still in the land of the waking. I don't know, Joe. A pause. Will you take the wheel for a bit? I think that we need to keep moving. Who knows how much time we really have? Sure, I said, and we quickly got out of the car and switched places. The night air was cold on my skin, and I once again glanced up at the stars, unable to not notice the brightest one of them all. The sky was especially clear tonight, out here in the desert where there was little light pollution. But looking around, I realized it was more than that. The streetlights that peppered the highway were off. There was no power flowing through their wires. I wondered if that was just out here, or if the entire state had lost power. I wondered if the entire world had. But then I was back in the car, in the universe, at least for now, again shrunk down to just me, Mary, and the creaking of old leather. My hands easily gripped onto the steering wheel. I had been using this old girl for so long that there were practically indents at the 10 and 2 marks. Thankfully, it only took a couple of tries to get the engine to turn over, and then we were back on the road, me in the driver's seat and Mary resting her head on the passenger window. A long stretch of silence ensued, with me just trying to concentrate on the road and not think about anything in particular, trying to ignore the strange atmosphere that filled the car. I watched the scruffy plant life flicker by, and I wondered why we had encountered no beasts since we had left the hospital. I barely knew anything about what was going on, of course, but if I had to wager a guess, it was due to the fact that it was, well, the middle of the desert. There were no humans out here. In fact, there was barely any animal life at all. These things, they always targeted people, or at least living things, and there was none of that here. Why they were doing that? Who knows? But one thing at a time. Do you look at the stars at all, Joe? Mary suddenly spoke up, startling me a little. But after that split second, I knew what she was asking immediately. I glanced away from the road for a moment to look up and confirm that yes, we were still heading south, towards the North Star. Mary wasn't just making idle conversation, that was for sure. It's odd, isn't it? I was never much of an astronomer before, she continued. And yet, I find myself looking to the sky often nowadays. I nodded. Because of it, right? The one that shines brighter. That seems to guide you. We both looked up at the inky blackness again. Let me ask you a question, Mary. Do you ever feel like you're being yanked around, like you're a pawn in a much bigger game? I asked, and she narrowed her eyes ever so slightly. Only recently. But what can we do about it? Should we do anything about it? It's not like it hasn't been helpful. I was surprised to hear that. What do you mean? Did it do something for you? I asked, causing Mary to seem surprised herself. Did I not mention it before? That's odd. I could have sworn I did. Well, when I was in the woods, trying to get Casper back, it was almost like the star helped guide me to him, and then helped guide me away. As strange as it is to say, I'm almost certain I would have died in those woods if it wasn't for its help. Despite Mary assuming that we had talked about this before, all of this was news to me. Actually, now that I was thinking about it, had I told her about the star guiding me to the women's shelter, and then helping me find a window to escape the fire? Did I tell you about how it helped me? When I was trapped in the fire, it guided me to a window so that I could break it open and escape. I would have almost certainly died in there without it. Mary shook her head slowly. No, Joe. No, you didn't tell me that. It's pretty unlike you to omit such an important detail. A look passed between us in that moment as realization set in. I responded slowly. The same to you. One of us forgetting to mention it, I could buy. But both? Mere days after it happened to us? That seems most strange indeed. Another pause as we digested that. I glanced at the sky yet again, half expecting the star to be gone now that we had finally acknowledged its existence, its influence that it was exerting over us, but no, it remained in the sky, still guiding us forward. Mary sighed. So what? First, giant aberrations of flesh attack us, and now a celestial body is somehow manipulating us into doing something? Why? For what reason? None of this makes any sense, Joe. I hate it. She aggressively shook her head. I agree, it doesn't. But like you said, it has been nothing but helpful to us. And right now, we need all the help we can get, even if that help comes from the sky. At night. As a star. I suddenly wondered if perhaps I had simply gone insane and was just imagining all of this. But the aching of my joints and the hardness of the seat pressing into my back assured me that this was all very real. Mary let out a harsh bark of a laugh and turned to look out the window, only allowing me to see the back of her head. You know what? Sure. Why not? Better to be a star's pawn than to get eaten alive by an abomination, I guess. Might as well see this through. It's not like I'm doing anything else. Her voice turned bitter. It's not like I have any goddamn obligations. I wonder if that fucking star took that away from me too. I knew what she meant. She was talking about the child, without prompting. perhaps for the first time since it had happened. With that slight encouragement, I figured now was as good of a time as any to ask a question that had been bothering me for a long time, as we had nothing better to do, and, well, I may not get the chance again. "Mary, can I ask you something?" She gave a nod, the movement barely noticeable as she continued to watch the blackness of the night roll by. "Why did you want a child? I apologize if that comes across as blunt, but, well, you never really struck me as the mother type, no offense. And when you first told me that you were pregnant, I figured a question like that would be uncouth. On top of that, you never even mentioned who the father was. I must admit, I was, and am, curious." Mary didn't turn away from the window, and for a long moment she didn't respond. I had figured it might take her a moment, but her answer came much quicker than I anticipated. I got the feeling that perhaps she had been thinking about this for a while. "It's all right. That's a very fair question. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. Why does anyone want a child? I guess, when I think about it, the idea of bringing a new life into the world, watching it grow and learn and hopefully become something better than me, it gives me this sense of joy that nothing else does in that way. It's almost like hope, you could say. It makes me optimistic about the world, and that everything continues on despite it all. With our line of work, we see so much death and despair that something like that seems almost mythical to me. Does that make sense?" I looked over at her, but she was still looking out the window, staring at nothing. I returned my eyes to the road and answered, "I think so. A better reason than most, even, I would say. It's just you never really seemed to be interested in that sort of thing. You never mentioned it to me." "Well, it was always in the back of my mind, but it never made sense financially or time-wise before. That is, until about a year ago. The jobs were coming in steady, I had built a decent amount of capital, and I was officially a homeowner. I figured now was as good of a time as any." "Just like that?" I said, to which Mary made a strange noise. "No, Joe, not just like that. I thought long and hard about it before making the plunge. But at some point, you have to stop thinking and start doing. So I went and, well, did it. As for the father, it was an anonymous donor. I have no idea who he was or what he was like, beyond some basic info like height, weight, education level, that sort of thing. I didn't think it was super important." I nodded slowly. "So you wanted a child, but without the father. I'm not sure I fully understand your thought process, Mary, but if it makes you happy, then who am I to judge? It's not as if I have never done unusual things in the pursuit of happiness." For the first time, she turned to look at me, a mild look of shock on her face as though she had just realized something. "I was happy," she murmured, almost surprised. "It was the happiest I had ever been, I think. I woke up every day looking forward to the next." A small smile crept onto her face. Everything was right in the world. Slowly the smile faded, and she was back to that stony expression that so rarely seemed to go away. But then everything just fell apart, so quickly I could barely keep track. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't stop. It just kept going faster and faster, and I was just holding on for my life. My parents died in a car accident, Joe. Did I even tell you that? Just weeks before I was due. I shook my head slowly. I didn't know that. I had no idea. Man, that had been a rough couple of weeks. She gave an ugly, terrible laugh at that, and I grimaced at it. I didn't think it was very funny at all. But I thought to myself, they would want me to keep going. That was the kind of people they were, ones that always persevered. I thought of myself that same way too. I thought I could do it. It was hard, so hard, but I knew that I could handle it. But then... Her voice trailed off, leaving us in silence. "You lost the baby," I said softly. I knew it needed to be said out loud, to finally be acknowledged in plain words. No more dancing around it. She looked at me then, and her expression was the same as it ever was, unreadable, but now silent tears ran down her face. I wouldn't have even known if I hadn't looked at her. That's the thing, Joe. I didn't lose the baby. He was born, happy and healthy, crying with good, strong lungs. The moment I heard that, I knew he was going to be perfect, an amazing child that would change the world. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off of my shoulders, knowing that he was going to be okay. That it was all going to be okay. But then they took him away. They took my boy. Said they just wanted to run some tests. I only got to hold him for a moment. I didn't want to give him to them, but they were doctors, and they assured me that it would only be for a moment. So I did. I did, Joe. And he never came back. For the first time, her voice hitched. Died from an allergic reaction to the needle. That's what they told me. They had been drawing a blood sample, and he just died from it. I was so weak from everything already, and when they told me that, it was like I broke, and I don't think I have ever recovered, not really. That's why I never contacted you, why I went full AWOL. I just couldn't handle anything anymore. She took a deep, shuddering breath here. The hospital never even gave me the body back. And I thought to myself, that can't be standard procedure, right? There is no way they don't give the child back to the mother, so they could at least hold a funeral. But, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but it's true, I was in such a bad way that I could barely feed myself. If the cat hadn't basically thrown itself at me, I am certain I would have died. Not through suicide, but because I had simply given up on living. That was the kind of state I was in. I was speechless. It must be incredibly hard for her to be talking about this. I couldn't even imagine the pain she had gone through, was going through. But I did keep going. And not just because of the cat, although that did help, but because of something that was constantly at the back of my mind, no matter how bad it got, something I couldn't let go no matter how hard I tried. She didn't need to tell me. I knew her, and I knew what it was. Why? I said, and she nodded. Exactly. That little question kept me going, always tugging at me, even when the pain was almost too much to bear. I was a detective, god damn it. Figuring stuff out was my job no matter how close I was to the case, and I can't shake it off. Why did he die? Once I thought about it, that allergic reaction answer was complete bullshit. I have never heard of anything like that. And more than that, why did I never get to see the body? Why was I escorted out of the hospital so quickly when I, by all accounts, was in no shape for even being moved in my condition? I had to admit, I had felt the pull of those questions as well as Mary had told her story. It was in both our natures, I suppose. We just couldn't let a stone like that go unturned. She continued, strength slowly trickling back into her voice. I went back to the hospital, you know. I wanted to talk to the doctors that had helped deliver him, and you know what the hospital told me? They had no idea who they were. They couldn't even find any records of me being there for the delivery. It was as though the whole thing had never even happened. I threw a right fit over that one, let me tell you. Demanded to be taken to the record rooms, to talk to the head nurse or doctor or anyone in charge, and they responded by throwing me out with security. Well, after that, I tried to go to the police, but they were useless. It was almost like they were afraid of something. It was something big, Joe. and I may have been in too bad of a way to see it for what it was then, but I can see it clearly now. She took a deep, shaky breath there, and I felt a pang of worry over how raspy that breathing was, but she continued on, regardless. Something strange was going on there. That is for certain. Did it connect to what is happening right now? Who knows? I certainly don't, but I intend to find out. That is my reason to continue on, to continue to fight. Her voice got a little softer here. And maybe, along the way, I'll find something else to keep going for. Who knows? It's funny, in a way, how that is so much more important to me than this whole situation. She gestured broadly around her. Is that insane? Am I crazy, Joe? She looked at me, expression back to unreadable, tears dried on her cheeks. You know, it's funny you ask that, because I was just wondering the same thing about myself. Maybe we have both gone crazy together. I sighed. But I don't think so. Sometimes I think we might be the last two sane people on Earth. I looked out the windshield at the empty, winding desert, with nothing but the cold wind to keep us company for miles around. Maybe the last two people on Earth, period. I muttered to myself. Mary sighed. Last two people, period? I don't think so. Last two sane people? Maybe. I've been thinking for a while now that we are the last two sane people left, if I'm completely honest with you. It kind of feels like everyone else lost the plot a while ago. I glanced over at her and she gave me a small, non-committal shrug. Are you alright? I asked. She sighed. I don't know, Joe. I feel like I'm on the verge of tears, all the time. I hate it. And really, I don't know if that feeling is ever going to really go away. I don't think it does. It just sits with you, forever at the back of your mind, weighing you down. I think it's just something I am gonna have to learn to deal with. It's the new normal, whether I like it or not. But talking about it here, with you, has helped. At least a little bit. So thank you, Joe. Again. I gave her a small smile and a shrug. Of course. Anytime. Silence descended over the car, and for a long time neither one of us said anything. I knew that she hadn't fallen asleep from the way she was sitting, but I was okay with the silence. A moment for both of us to catch our breath. And if she didn't want to talk, well then that was fine by me. But finally, I simply had to speak up, for there was a question that I had been mulling over for a while in my head, and I simply had to ask.